CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Jamie Owen. Welcome to the programme. Our top stories. Nearly 200 people arrested in France after another night of unrest sparked by the deadly police shooting of a teenager. Our other headlines: European Union leaders pledge their support for Ukraine and discuss long-term backing as they meet in Brussels. It's football practice now. Soon it could be military training. The four friends about to turn 18 and eligible to fight on the front line. And questions continue over the whereabouts of two of Russia's top generals after Wagner's failed mutiny. Nearly 200 people have been arrested in France after a second night of unrest sparked by the deadly police shooting of a teenager during a traffic stop. Police anger has spilled onto the streets in towns and cities across the country after a video was shared online showing two officers stopping a car driven by a 17-year-old of North African descent, identified as Nahel, and then firing into the vehicle. President Emmanuel Macron has held a crisis meeting with his senior ministers over the shooting, where he also condemned the rioting.
Clearly, the emotion that comes with the death of a young man calls for contemplation and calm, and it's what the government has constantly called for. I think this is what should guide the next hours and the tributes. Nonetheless, it has been the subject of reactions, presumably attempts to change what happened. And the last hours have been marked by violent scenes against police stations, but also schools and town halls, and basically against institutions and the Republic. It's absolutely unjustifiable.
Let's talk to our correspondent Ross Cullen, watching events for us in Paris. Ross, so another night of violence across France last night. Do you sense that this is an end to it, or are there more protests expected?
Well, we've just had the conclusion of a march, Jamie. There was a tribute march known as a White March this afternoon in Nanterre, the western Paris suburb, where on Tuesday Nahel M, as he is known, was shot dead by police. The march was led by his mother. Thousands of people, most of them dressed in white or light clothing, marching along a route in Nanterre, finishing at the police prefecture. That passed off peacefully. That's what the government said in their 8 a.m. meeting this morning, that they wanted this march that had been planned and sanctioned for this afternoon to go ahead peacefully, and it seems to have done so. There are still lots of people waiting outside the police prefecture. Also in Nanterre, the Prime Minister, Elisabeth Borne, in the last hour has spoken, saying that nothing justifies violence. She was standing in front of a local associations building that's normally focused on social action, social assistance in the community that was the subject of an arson attack. We have had the government pretty strong on the violence, saying that it's injustifiable, saying that it's intolerable, and we know that 40,000 extra police officers are now being put on standby by the Interior Minister ahead of what could be tonight, Thursday night, a possible third consecutive night of violence.
Based on the investigation and the elements we gathered, the court considers that the legal conditions for the use of a weapon have not been fulfilled. Based on the elements and the need to preserve the investigation, the court has required the police officer who fired the gun to be in temporary detention.
Ross, just how common are police shootings in France?
Well, unlike the UK, where the majority of police officers going about their daily work would not be armed, the majority of police officers in France do carry weapons as part of their day-to-day duties. 13 people were killed in 2022, so an average of more than one a month. in when the police have asked them to stop their vehicle in a traffic incident where they do not stop for the police at a traffic incident. The police open fire. 13 people died in such circumstances last year. So there is a lot of an ongoing discourse overall about police brutality. How many times have we mentioned it this year so far, month after month, of pension reform strikes? And during those protests, police are all in full body armour, firing rubber bullets, firing tear gas, using their truncheons, using water cannon to beat up protesters. So the police are saying that we have to be protecting ourselves against attacks by demonstrators. But then on the other hand, a lot of demonstrators saying the police alone, their presence is sometimes a provocation. And so we will see what does happen this evening with those tens of thousands of more police officers being put on standby.
Ross, thank you for that. Our correspondent Ross Cullen in Paris. Leaders of the European Union have reaffirmed their support for Ukraine in a summit in Brussels. The meeting comes just days after the Wagner Group's aborted rebellion in Russia. Those events and what they mean for the Ukraine conflict and Europe are expected to dominate the talks. Another rather thorny issue for leaders is migration and how to actually implement the recent deal announced by the Commission President Ursula von der Leyen in Tunisia. Well, let's talk to our correspondent Mark Webster in Brussels. Mark, so the war in Ukraine still dominating the agenda?
Absolutely, Jamie. You know, the ongoing conflict in Ukraine is the #1 issue here. And of course, it was emphasized, underlined by the fact that President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine did address the assembled heads of government and state by video link. And he was expected to ask them yet again to make sure they gave him all the support, particularly in hardware, that he could possibly use. He was also expected, though, to thank the EU for the $78 billion in assistance which it has already provided. Now, bear in mind, on top of that is any one-to-one provision of material that other countries will have given Ukraine. It's absolutely no doubt at all that the EU members will repeat before the end of this their absolute united and ringing endorsement of the government of Kiev, and make sure that it's completely clear to the authorities in Moscow that they're not prepared to back down or reduce the level of support they're giving. Now, one big thing that is starting to trouble people, particularly the Lithuanian president who spoke about it when he arrived, is the possible arrival of Wagner Group troops in Belarus. Now, they, of course, share a border with Lithuania, and the Lithuanian president said he was deeply worried about what would happen if that new front could be opened up. Now, he also said, look, we have no certain information, but it is something that NATO will be watching. Jens Stoltenberg, the NATO Secretary General, was also here. He's played a very big part in discussions here so far, because, of course, many EU members are also members of the 31-nation military alliance. And he was wanting to reassure everybody that there was no question of any faltering at all in the West's commitment to support for Ukraine as it carries on with its offensive. And it will continue to support large amounts of hardware in order to back the Ukrainian army.
Mark, just putting Ukraine to one side for a moment, EU members also debating the rather divisive issue of migration. EU leaders set to discuss the recent deal announced by Ursula von der Leyen in Tunisia.
Well, they're always hopeful. That's the way the EU works. They say if they negotiate long enough, eventually everybody will fall into line. But this is proving highly contentious. Now, despite the tragic accident which saw hundreds of migrants die in a boating collapse recently, including possibly as many as 100 children, the EU still has divergent views on what the way forward is. Now, as far as the EU is concerned, in a briefing which was given yesterday, they said they want to tackle the underlying causes. They want to set up partnerships with countries to make it less attractive for them to leave their countries and come here. Equally, he wants to try and establish some sort of mechanism which would allow the EU to get them back. What is highly contentious, however, is a policy which has been agreed by majority voting, but which one country in particular, Poland, says it will not accept. This is the idea that migrants would be allocated to different countries, and they would have to take a certain number of them. Now, Poland says it will under no circumstances agree with that. because it would prove highly unpopular at home. The trouble is, the way the EU is currently constituted, for every single migrant that an EU member country refuses to take, it would be fined the equivalent of $22,000 for each and every one of them. They would have to pay that either in material or resources or help for the migrant community. And certainly, as I say, Poland is going to make it very, very plain. It does want to tighten up on migration rules. It does not want to accept what the EU policy is going forward. So it seems unlikely on that one there's going to be much agreement between the member states.
Mark, thank you for that. Our correspondent, Mark Webster, in Brussels. Ukraine has arrested a man suspected of committing treason by helping Russia carry out a deadly missile strike on the restaurant in Kramatorsk. The number of people killed in Tuesday's attack has now risen to 12. The suspect, who worked at a local transport firm, is accused of filming cars with military license plates in the restaurant car park and sending that footage to Moscow. He faces a possible life sentence if found guilty. Well, Ukraine's Deputy Defense Minister says her country now has an operational advantage around the city of Bakhmut, where troops are engaging in fierce fighting with Russian forces. Let's talk to our correspondent, Stephanie Fried, in Kyiv. Stephanie, Ukraine claiming some limited progress around Bakhmut. I know you've recently been to Chernihiv in the north, which continues to suffer from strikes from Russia. What's the latest you have for us?
Well, limited is absolutely the word, Jamie, in terms of the progress in Bakhmut. Bakhmut was a contentious area, fought over to the point of it's now an apocalyptic ruin between the two sides. And then in May, the Wagner Group operatives, the operatives that are operating on behalf of Russia, they claimed victory, that they had taken Bakhmut. Now we're hearing that Ukraine has made limited, slow advances in the area. Bakhmut, when you look at it, not necessarily it's strategic in the long term. It became basically a point of contention, a point of victory for the two sides. So it looks like they're back at it in terms of the fierce fighting. You asked about Chernihiv in the north, which is right along the Belarus border, and we're just now talking about the Wagner Group and their operatives. Satellite pictures are showing that possibly they're setting up camp in Belarus. These were the operatives operating again on behalf of Russia. And so the people in Chernihiv, where we were yesterday, which is a few dozen kilometers from the border, you know, they were hit very hard. They were under siege for an entire month plus at the start of this entire campaign. They're watching, particularly the young men who stand to possibly go and fight against those operatives. Let's take a look at this story. Vova, Roman, Ivan, and Daniel, high school friends. When Russia's broadened campaign in Ukraine kicked off in February 2022, their paths separated. Vova's family left town and then the country. Roman's family relocated to a nearby village.
Within 2 weeks of the start, we left for Cherkasy.
Ivan was the only one who stayed.
We had no choice. We have a grandma, and we couldn't leave her, so we stayed.
Chernihiv fell under siege at the start of Russia's campaign. Artillery and airstrikes pounded the city for 39 days, killing as many as 50 people per day, knocking out water and electricity, and cutting food and medical supplies. The situation got so bad that local morgues didn't have enough caskets to accommodate victims. Then in early April 2022, Russia's army pulled back. The approximately 150,000 residents who fled Chernihiv are gradually coming back. The four friends stayed in touch during their separation. They are about to separate again. The young men graduated high school in May. Within the coming months, they all turn 18, which means they're all eligible for the draft. According to Ukraine's Central Statistics Bureau, approximately 250,000 young Ukrainians will be eligible for military service this year.
I can't say I'm happy. No, not at all.
This is a really important time in my life, but I can't say it's the best.
Vova plans to exit Ukraine before he turns 18. Daniel, Roman, and Ivan dream of university studies, but understand reality may take them down a different path.
I don't feel like I'm an adult.
First the COVID, then the war. It's like I just got robbed, like a few years of my life.
They can't get those years back, but hope peace is on the horizon so they can make up for lost time. And you know, it's interesting because Roman talked about being robbed of his years, feeling like he was still stuck in 2018. And yet, when I asked him about the military, he was very positive. He said, if I need to serve, I'll serve, not a problem. Others didn't feel that way. And they said that they don't want to go into the army. And as noted in that report, Vova's going abroad. He's going to study at university. Jamie?
Stephanie, thank you very much for that. Our correspondent, Stephanie Freed. You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, crunch time for food prices as French companies say they lower the cost on oil, vegetables and pasta.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliette Mann.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
This week on Razor, the power of red light to recharge retinal cells, and measuring the intelligence of birds by seeing if they understand magic.
Corvids use these intricate techniques or tactics of deception, which resemble some of the tactics that we do.
So they're doing magic with their mates?
They do a sleight of beak, if you will.
Hello, welcome back. A reminder of our top stories. Nearly 200 people arrested in France after another night of unrest sparked by the deadly police shooting of a teenager. Our other headlines, European Union leaders pledge their support for Ukraine and discuss long-term backing as they meet in Brussels. The whereabouts of two senior Russian generals remains unclear following a failed mercenary mutiny over the weekend. Valery Gerasimov and Sergei Surovikin have disappeared from public view amid unconfirmed reports that the pair had prior knowledge of the Wagner Group rebellion, which ended when the group's leader struck a deal. Well, let's talk to our correspondent Dasha Chernyshova in Moscow. Dasha, what's the Kremlin been saying on this?
Well, the Kremlin has redirected all the questions with regards to Sergei Surovikin to the Russian Ministry of Defense, saying that it was the prerogative of MOD to have answers to those questions. When asked whether the Russian president could still trust General Surovikin, Dmitry Peskov, presidential spokesperson, said that the Russian president, as Supreme Commander-in-Chief, who works with the defense minister and with the chief of general staff, Valery Gerasimov. So, again, we don't have the direct response from the Kremlin. All is redirected to MOD. But the questions have indeed been reasoned. We also understand that the last video message that has been posted by Sergei Surovikin was on the 24th of June when he was seen calling on the Wagner fighters to stop this mutiny. But at the same time, you just have to remember that both Surovikin and Gerasimov are not such public personalities. They never appear on public that often. So it is yet to be established whether anything has happened happened to them. And also, presidential spokesperson Dmitry Peskov has been saying before with regard to whether Surovikin could have prior knowledge of the Wagner chief plans. He was saying that there is a lot of speculation as well as gossip surrounding the uprising by Yevgeny Prigozhin. So certainly he suggested that that was yet another suspicious report of that kind. So certainly we're yet to hear from Surovikin himself or Gerasimov, but the Kremlin is refusing to give any concrete answers.
OK, well, those are the two generals. I mean, can we talk more widely about what's going on with the Wagner Group and their leader or former leader?
Well, indeed, we have heard from the Belarusian president, Alexander Lukashenko, that the head of the Wagner mercenary group, Yevgeny Prigozhin, was in Belarus, saying that the combat experience of the commanders of the Wagner group would be useful for Belarusian state, and the defense minister of Belarus has confirmed that. We also understand that they are now using the abandoned military base, as suggested by the Belarusian president, and also some reports have been suggesting that the group might have been building additional bases in Belarus. This is yet to be confirmed by the Belarusian authorities. But interestingly, today we've also heard the head of Russia's State Duma's Defense Committee, Andrei Kartapolov, saying that Wagner Group has known in advance that unless they do sign the contracts with Russia's Ministry of Defense by the 1st of July, they would not be able to participate in the course of the special military operation in Ukraine, as Moscow describes it. He also has said that Prigozhin was aware and he was informed that there will be no more financing for his group if they do not participate in the operation, which would not be possible unless they do sign those contracts. So there is a lot of information coming at the moment, but no clarity from Yevgeny Prigozhin himself. Now, we understand that the fighters of the Wagner Group, who have been described largely as patriots by the Russian president, who was actually trying to distinguish between Prigozhin himself and the Wagner mercenaries, they will be offered to sign those contracts. And if they do agree, they will definitely continue to participate in the course of the special military operation in Ukraine, maybe as part of a volunteer detachment, maybe as part of the regular Russian army.
Dasha, thank you for that. Our correspondent Dasha Chernashova in Moscow. US President Joe Biden has pinned his re-election hopes firmly on the economy, claiming his so-called Bidenomics will restore the American dream. In a speech in Chicago, he said he would deliver a clean break from decades of Republican policy, which he said had only benefited the rich. Public approval over his economic management is low amid anxiety over high inflation and rising interest rates. Biden says people should focus on the positives, like a strong rebound from a COVID-induced recession during his 2 years in office.
Bidenomics is working. When I took office, the pandemic was raging and our economy was reeling. Supply chains are broken, millions of people unemployed. Today, the U.S. has the highest economic growth rate, leading the world economies since the pandemic, the highest in the world. We created 13.4 million new jobs, more jobs in 2 years than any president has ever made in 4 and 2. And folks, it's no accident.
Presumed human remains have been found inside the wreckage of the submersible that imploded on a dive to the wreck of the Titanic. Debris from the craft was brought ashore in Canada on Wednesday. It'll now be transported to the United States for further analysis. All 5 passengers on board the sub died on the 18th of June after it imploded about 90 minutes into the dive to view the shipwreck. Morocco has recalled its ambassador to Sweden as several countries condemned the burning of the Islamic holy book, the Quran, during a protest in Stockholm. Turkey, a NATO member with a say over whether Sweden gains membership to the alliance, has called it a despicable act. The protest was authorized by the police, but the demonstrator was later charged with agitation against an ethnic or national group. China is set to reach its renewable energy targets 5 years early. That's according to a report by Global Energy Monitor. The San Francisco-based NGO said China is set to double its wind and solar capacity by 2025, well ahead of the 2030 deadline. In the first quarter of the year, China's solar power potential was more than the rest of the world combined. Sky-high food prices have left a bad taste in the mouths of European consumers, with governments clamping down on retailers suspected of profiteering from price increases. In France, that crackdown is bearing fruit. 75 top French food manufacturers have now committed to lowering prices on a whole range of items starting in July. Our correspondent Natalie Malhas reports.
As people struggle to cope with the cost of living, making savings in the supermarket is now a necessity for many. But prices that were quick to rise have been much slower to fall, despite costs coming down.
For months, retailers here say food items were priced to keep up with energy costs, wages and commodities that soared after the COVID pandemic and the war in Ukraine. Record high food price inflation surged to about 16% in March.
In May, it cooled marginally to 14%. French lawmakers have been aggressive in trying to bring prices down, forcing retailers to reflect cheaper raw material costs in supermarket aisles. For many, the savings couldn't come soon enough.
I'm not taking the basket, so I prefer to take all things in my hand, so I don't buy much things. Yeah, and I'm choosing the cheapest one.
I don't really have a strategy for going to the supermarkets. I just try to spend as much as I used to. This often means I need to buy less. It's hard now. We need to compare prices. We need to be careful. There's definitely fewer products in my basket now. But I don't think companies want to bring the prices down. Keeping the prices up is a good thing for them.
In June, the French government convinced 75 food companies to cut prices of dozens of items amid early signs of a decrease in raw material costs.
For much of the second half of the year, it is only that period where we'll start to see food prices moderating. It is quite clear why there's been such a lag between the retailer as well as what we're seeing in the farm level for the past 5 months, because global agricultural prices started softening aggressively towards the end of the year.
Consumers are expected to see price cuts of between 2 and 10% from July.
If you look at anything in the cereals basket related to grain, we think that that is going to decline in a coming months. That will be a lead. Secondly, anything that is on vegetable oil related products, we'll likely see those prices declining. Fruits and vegetables are also going to decline. We're not as positive about meat products because across the world today, we have what we call the avian influenza that is negatively affecting poultry farming in Brazil, in Europe, in South Africa, in Australia. It's the same thing in the egg prices. So that is going to be upside pressure on those prices. And the same is true for sugar prices because in South America today, the sugar fields are not in good shape.
Protecting consumers from exorbitant food costs is a priority for European governments. In the UK, supermarket executives were hauled before Parliament monitoring food and fuel prices, while Hungary has imposed mandatory price caps on some food essentials. Natalie Malhas, CGTN, Paris.
The headlines again. Nearly 200 people arrested in France after another night of unrest sparked by the deadly police shooting of a teenager. Our other headlines: European Union leaders pledge their support for Ukraine and discuss long-term backing as they meet in Brussels. And questions continue over the whereabouts of 2 of Russia's top generals after Wagner's failed mutiny. And that is the world today. Thank you for watching. There's more news on CGTN Europe's channel, on the Telegram app, or scan the QR code on the screen to get stories and updates sent direct to your phone. We're back with more news at the top of this hour. Coming up next, it's World Insight. For now, from all of the team in London, it's goodbye.